She stood in chains, her voice trembling only for a moment before cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "I speak 9 languages," she declared, and the judge laughed, just seconds before the truth wiped the smile from his face. What happened next left everyone stunned. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because you won't want to miss the twists and turns waiting for you. The wooden gavel struck 3 times, echoing through the packed courtroom like thunder. The sound silenced the murmurs of the crowd, though their eyes remained fixed on the young girl standing at the defendant's bench. She looked far too fragile to be the center of such a storm. 16 years old, wrists bound in cold steel cuffs, her dark hair spilling loosely over her shoulders. Yet there was something in her posture, in the way her chin lifted against the weight of 1,000 stares, that made her seem larger than life. Judge Esteban Fuentes leaned forward from his high bench, lips curled into a mocking smile. He was a man known more for his sarcasm than for mercy, and to him, this trial was less about justice and more about entertainment. He had grown tired of the endless parade of petty criminals, and when the prosecutor presented this girl as a master forger, claiming she had manipulated documents in multiple languages, Fuentes saw his chance to make a spectacle. "So, you claim you know 9 languages?" the judge said, his voice dripping with irony. 9, even my colleagues at the university barely master 3 or 4. And here you stand, a girl from the slums, telling us you're some kind of prodigy. The audience chuckled, some openly laughing at her expense. A few journalists scribbled notes, hoping for an amusing headline rather than the truth. Prosecutor Ramirez, a stout man with a neatly trimmed mustache, seized the moment to step forward with a sly grin. "Your Honor," he said loudly, turning to the jury, "what we have here is not a gifted student, but a liar. A teenager with delusions of grandeur, weaving tales to escape justice. She claims she speaks 9 languages, but we have seen no proof. And as for the documents she touched, what better explanation than forgery? She played with languages she didn't even understand, and now she hides behind empty claims." The laughter grew. Mariana Torres stood motionless, her pale face expressionless. Her mother sat in the first row, clutching a faded handkerchief, her lips pressed in silent prayer. Finally, Mariana lifted her head. Her voice was calm, steady, though it carried the weight of defiance. "Yes," she said clearly, her words slicing through the noise, "I know 9 languages." The laughter died instantly. The room stilled as if the air itself had been cut. For a heartbeat, even Judge Fuentes faltered, though he quickly forced a booming laugh to fill the silence. 9 languages. Truly, señorita, you should be on stage, not in a courtroom, he sneered. This is a tribunal, not a circus. Do you expect us to believe that a girl who cannot even afford proper shoes can master what takes scholars decades? Mariana's eyes did not waver. "I don't ask you to believe, Your Honor. I ask you to listen." Her words were simple, yet the way she spoke them made the room shift. The audience leaned forward, curious despite themselves. Even the jury, who had been half bored by the proceedings, straightened in their seats. Ramirez scoffed, sensing the danger of her composure. "Then prove it, right here, right now. Unless, of course, you are afraid." Mariana stepped forward, the clink of her chains echoed faintly, and her mother stifled a gasp. She took a breath, then spoke in flawless English, her tone clear and confident. "My name is Mariana Torres." The words rang out, unmistakably perfect. Gasps rippled through the room. Before anyone could react, she continued in smooth, fluid French. "Je suis accusée injustement. I am accused unjustly." The translation was unnecessary, the elegance of her pronunciation silenced any doubt. Then, in Portuguese, "A verdade não tem nada, porque sempre encontra luz." The truth fears nothing, because it always finds the light. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Journalists dropped their pens in shock, scrambling to record every word. Judge Fuentes shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to hide the sudden tightness in his jaw. But Mariana was not finished. Her voice took on the lyrical rhythm of Arabic as she said, "The truth never dies." Then, in careful but natural Chinese, she declared, "Wo shuo de shi jenda." What I say is true. The silence was total now. No one dared laugh. Even Prosecutor Ramirez's smirk faded into disbelief. His face flushed red as Mariana stood tall, her eyes sweeping the room, her chains no longer symbols of weakness but of strength contained. The judge raised his gavel and slammed it down, more to regain his own control than to restore order. "Enough," he barked, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Mariana turned to him, her lips curving in the faintest trace of a smile. I am not the one turning this courtroom into a circus, Your Honor. I am simply showing you that what you dismissed as impossible is, in fact, true. Her mother's eyes welled with tears. The girl she had raised, the girl who taught herself from scraps of old dictionaries and neighbors' lessons, had just silenced an entire tribunal. And in that silence, for the first time, Mariana Torres had the power. The stillness in the courtroom was broken only by the scratching of pens as journalists scribbled furiously. The laughter that had filled the room minutes ago had dissolved into something else entirely: unease, awe, even fear. Prosecutor Ramirez swallowed hard, his eyes darting between the jury and the girl who had just turned his case into a spectacle. He had expected her to stumble, to mutter a few broken words from a schoolbook and embarrass herself. Instead, she had stolen the attention of everyone in the room, twisting it against him like a blade. This is a performance," Ramirez thundered, regaining his voice. He jabbed a finger at her. "A trick, nothing more. She has memorized a few phrases from the internet and now hopes to fool this tribunal into thinking she is some kind of prodigy. But the charges remain, señoritas, the charges remain." Mariana turned to him slowly, her expression calm, her dark eyes cutting through his bluster. When she spoke again, it was in German, her tone deliberate, steady, the words rolling off her tongue as naturally as her mother's lullabies. "Manchmal ist die Wahrheit schwer zu akzeptieren." Sometimes the truth is hard to accept. The jury leaned in, listening, their pens poised in hesitation. Ramirez's cheeks flamed crimson, his lips trembling with frustration. Mariana's voice softened, yet carried across the chamber as she switched to Italian. "La giustizia non può nascer dalle bugie." Justice cannot be born from lies. The words hung heavy in the air. Judge Fuentes, who had prided himself on ruling his court like an emperor, felt the balance shifting. He struck his gavel sharply. "Order. This is not a theater for your recitals, Señorita Torres. Whether or not you know these languages is irrelevant. The charge against you is forgery." Mariana faced him squarely. For a moment, the chains on her wrists glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights, a reminder of the power he still held over her. But her voice, unshaken, struck like steel. "Forgery," she repeated. "The documents you hold up as evidence were never forgeries. They were translations. My translations. Exercises for my studies, because when I wasn't working alongside my mother, I was teaching myself languages. What you call a crime is nothing but your ignorance, Your Honor. You couldn't understand them, so you assumed guilt. It was easier to accuse me than to admit you didn't know what you were reading." The crowd gasped. Even the journalists stopped writing for a heartbeat. Never had anyone, especially a shackled girl from the barrios, spoken to Judge Fuentes in such a way. The judge's jaw tightened. "Careful, girl," he warned. But the warning sounded hollow, even to himself. Ramirez, desperate to recover control, puffed out his chest. "Nonsense. These so-called translations matched classified documents almost word for word. How do you explain that?" Mariana's lips curved in the faintest smile, a smile that carried both pain and defiance. "Because knowledge is dangerous to men like you, isn't it?" she said softly. "You see a girl with nothing but books and determination, and you tremble. So you paint her as a criminal. You call her a fraud. But the real fraud is standing in front of this jury, twisting the truth for applause." The prosecutor staggered back, his composure unraveling. The jury's eyes turned toward him, no longer with confidence but with doubt. The whispers in the courtroom grew louder, feeding on his unease. Mariana turned once more to the judge, her voice steady and unyielding. "You wanted a spectacle, Your Honor. You wanted to laugh at me. And now your laughter has turned into silence. If you truly care about justice, then let the truth be heard in every language I speak. I am not guilty." Her words reverberated through the chamber like a bell. For the first time in his long career, Judge Fuentes felt the ground beneath his authority tremble. He struck his gavel again, harder this time, but the sound no longer commanded obedience, it only echoed his desperation. And in the hush that followed, Mariana's mother pressed her hands to her lips, tears streaming freely. The child she had raised in the shadows of poverty now stood taller than the men who ruled the court. The battle was no longer about documents. It was about dignity, truth, and the unshakable voice of a girl who refused to be silenced. The courtroom buzzed with a nervous energy. It wasn't the usual hum of a trial, it was something heavier, like a storm rolling in. The jury shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. They had walked in thinking this would be another routine case. A poor girl, an open and shut accusation, a conviction. But now, the certainty had been ripped out from under them. Prosecutor Ramirez wiped at the sweat beading on his forehead. His papers, once held so confidently, now slipped from his hands. He bent to gather them, but his fingers trembled, scattering them further. The sight drew chuckles from the gallery, the same gallery that had mocked Mariana only minutes earlier. The laughter had turned its aim. Ramirez slammed the papers onto the desk and raised his voice. Do not be deceived, she plays tricks with words, but this case is about evidence. About documents. She hides behind her so-called talent, but the proof remains that she meddled with files that did not belong to her. Mariana took a step forward, the chain between her wrists rattling softly. Her eyes locked on him with a calmness that unnerved him more than anger ever could. If knowledge is a crime, then yes, I am guilty. Guilty of learning what others thought I could never learn. Guilty of using words to open doors you wanted shut. The room went still, every word cut into Ramirez's argument, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but his bluster. Mariana turned slowly to face the jury, her voice carrying steady and clear. You were told I forged documents. But what is forgery if not an accusation born from ignorance? These weren't government secrets. They weren't counterfeits. They were translations, my translations. Work I did to practice, to learn, to grow. Tell me, how can growth be a crime? One juror, a woman with silver hair, leaned forward, eyes softening. Another, a young man who had earlier scoffed at Mariana's claim, now looked down at his notes with shame. Judge Fuentes leaned back, his knuckles white as they gripped the arms of his chair. He had ruled this courtroom for decades, commanding silence with nothing but a glance. Yet here, a girl in chains had wrestled control from him. He struck the gavel once more. The sharp crack rang out, but it did not silence the whispers, it only highlighted his loss of power. Mariana did not flinch. Instead, she raised her head, her voice now gentle but resolute. You mocked me for speaking 9 languages, Your Honor. But today, I've spoken the one you've all forgotten. Fuentes narrowed his eyes. And what language is that, señorita? Her answer was quiet, yet it carried through the chamber with the weight of a hammer. Respect. Gasps echoed, followed by a silence so deep it felt like the world itself had stopped listening. The jury retired, but they did not take long. Whispers spread like wildfire as the minutes stretched. Mariana's mother clutched her handkerchief so tightly it tore at the edges. Mariana stood, motionless, her eyes fixed on the doors behind which her fate was being decided. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman rose, his face pale but resolute. Your Honor, he said, we find the defendant not guilty. The words rippled through the courtroom like thunder. Gasps, shouts, even cheers broke free. Mariana's mother collapsed into tears, pressing her face into her hands. Journalists leapt to their feet, pens scratching furiously, already crafting tomorrow's headlines. Judge Fuentes sat frozen, the verdict striking harder than any gavel. He looked at Mariana, not as a child to mock, but as an equal who had stripped him bare before his own court. Mariana closed her eyes, breathing deeply. The chains around her wrists were unlocked, falling to the floor with a metallic clatter that sounded, to her, like freedom itself. Her mother rushed forward, wrapping her in trembling arms. Mariana held her tightly, whispering something only she could hear. But as she turned one last time to face the courtroom, her final words rang clear, etched into the memory of everyone who had witnessed that day. I may know 9 tongues, but none of them matter more than the one that binds us all. And that is respect, the only language that can bring justice. The doors of the courtroom opened, and for the first time, Mariana walked out not as a defendant but as a victor. And those who had laughed at her would never forget the day a girl in chains silenced them all. And that day, the girl who once stood accused walked out of the courtroom as a symbol of courage, silencing everyone who had mocked her. Her words in 9 languages proved one timeless truth, that respect is the only language justice understands. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon, because more stories with twists you'll never forget are coming your way.